Queen Vashti refused. She did not obey her husband's order to flaunt her beauty before the men at his party. This must have been a difficult decision for Vashti to make, especially since her husband was King Xerxes, who ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from Egypt to India, and that this party was a climactic finish to a 6-month tour of his palace and grounds. When the king was informed of his wife's refusal, he asked the experts, "According to the law, what should be done to Queen Vashti? She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes." An expert responded that Vashti should never again be allowed to enter the presence of King Xerxes, and that the king should give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. The king banished his wife Vashti, as his advisors had suggested. He also sent messengers throughout the kingdom to declare that every man should be ruler over his own household. After King Xerxes' anger subsided, his personal attendants suggested that all of the young, beautiful virgins be gathered together and given beauty treatments, and then the king could select one to be his queen.
And the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and his approval more than any of the other virgins. And so he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officials. And he declared a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. But Esther kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about their plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn went to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. When this report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were hanged on the gallows. All this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman son of Hammedatha the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Then the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why did you disobey the king's command?" Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore the two officials told Haman about this to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet, having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of only killing Mordecai, but instead looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. And in the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, they cast the pur, that is the lot, in the presence of Haman to select the day and the month. And the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. And Haman said to King Xerxes, "There's a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples of the provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of all other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them. I will put 10,000 talents of silver into your royal treasury for the men who carry out this business." So the king took the signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. "Keep the money," the king said, "and do with the people as you please." Then on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretary secretaries were summoned and wrote out in the script of each province and the language of each people Haman's orders, the king's satraps, the governors of the various provinces, and the nobles of the various peoples. These are written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the provinces with orders to kill, destroy, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and little children, all on one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. Copies of the text of the edict were issued as law, so the people of every nationality will be ready for that day. Spurred on by the king's command, the royal couriers went out and issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay on sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress and sent clothes for him to put on instead of a sackcloth, but he would not accept them. So she summoned Hathach, the king's eunuch assigned to attend her, and told him, "Find out what is troubling Mordecai and why." So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city and followed the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict issued for the annihilation, which was published in Susa, and told him to show it to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to urge her to go into the king's presence and beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. And Hathach went to Esther and reported what Mordecai had said. And Esther instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the royal officials and the peoples of the provinces know that for any man or woman who goes into the king's presence without being summoned, the king has but one law, that he be put to death. There's one exception, and that is if the king extends his golden scepter to him and spares his life. But 30 days had passed since I was called to go into the king." When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, that you alone of all the Jews will be saved. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will rise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. But who knows but that you have been called to royal position for such a time as this." And Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go, gather together all the people who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, day or night. I and my maids will fast as you. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Mordecai carried out all of Esther's instructions. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. And the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half my kingdom it will be given you." "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." "Bring Haman at once, so that we may do as Esther asks." So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. While the king was drinking wine, he again asked Esther, "Queen Queen Esther, now what is your petition? It will be given to you. And what is your request? Even up to half my kingdom it will be granted. Esther replied, my petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king, together with Haman, come tomorrow to a banquet I will prepare for him, and then I will answer the king's question. Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman contained himself and went home. Calling together his friends and Zerash's wife, he boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him above all the other nobles and officials. And that's not all. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave. And she's invited me, along with the king, tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew, Mordecai, sitting at the king's gate. Zerash's wife and his friend said to him, have a gallows built 75 feet high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. And then go with the king to the dinner and be happy. This idea delighted Haman, and he had the gallows built. That night, the king could not sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, a record of his reign, be brought in and read to him. And it was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. And what honor or recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. Who is in the court? The king said. Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak with the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had erected for him. His attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him what should be done for the man the king delights to honor. Now Haman thought to himself, who said that the king would rather honor than me? So he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on his head, and entrust the robe and the horse to one of the king's most noble princes, and have him robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him to the streets on horse, proclaiming before him, this is what is done to the man the king delights to honor. Go at once, the king commanded. Get the robe and horse. Do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you've recommended. So Haman got the robe and the horse, and he robed Mordecai the Jew, and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done to the man the king delights to honor. Afterward Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief, and told Zerash's wife and his friends everything that had happened to him. His wife Zerash and his friends said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. While they were still talking, the king's eunuchs came and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. While they were drinking wine that second day, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, O king, and if it pleases the king, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold for destruction, slaughter, and annihilation. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet. for no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is the man who dare do such a thing?" Esther said, "The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman!" And Haman was terrified before the king and queen. And the king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, seeing the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king was returning from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, "A gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He had it made for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." The king said, "Hang him on it!" And so they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's fury subsided.
That same day, Queen Esther was given Haman's estate, which she entrusted to her cousin Mordecai. When King Xerxes was told that Mordecai was Esther's cousin, the king gave Mordecai his signet ring. Queen Esther again entered the king's inner court without being summoned, but he spared her life by extending his golden scepter to his distressed and weeping queen. She begged him to put an end to Haman's evil plot to destroy the Jews. So King Xerxes gave Esther permission to write another irrevocable decree. Swiftly the new document was constructed and dispersed. The king's edict permitted the Jews to assemble together, protect themselves, destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force that might attack them, and to plunder the property of their enemies. This edict was quickly distributed and announced in the city of Susa so that the Jews would be ready to avenge themselves. Mordecai was royally arrayed, and because of the edicts, there was a joyous celebration among the Jews. Many people of other nationalities didn't want to be on the losing end of the battle, so they became Jews. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, the Jews slaughtered their adversaries, and in Susa alone they killed 500 men. Among those killed were Haman's 10 sons that he had so arrogantly boasted of. However, the Jews did not touch the plunder. The king asked Queen Esther if she had any other requests for him. Esther asked that the Jews again be granted permission to defend themselves the next day, and that Haman's 10 sons would be hanged on the gallows. The king consented. On the following day, the Jews in Susa killed another 300 men. However, none of them touched the spoils. The Jews then held a great celebration, and Mordecai established an annual celebration, which is called Purim, in commemoration of this great deliverance. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by many Jews because he had worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of the Jews. Each of us, like Esther, is in a unique situation in life. Esther chose to be obedient to God by listening to wise counsel. God also wants us to use our own personal situations for such a time as this.